It's a completely ordinary morning. You open your eyes, and the first thing that greets you isn't silence, but a stream of thoughts, one after another. Today's work, unresolved pressure, things people said, things you still haven't done. And in that very moment, your day has already begun, not with an action, but with the way you think. Marcus Aurelius once made a profound observation, that the quality of your life is tied to the quality of your thoughts. This isn't just an inspirational slogan, it's a very real observation about how we, as humans, operate. When your mind is dominated by worry, comparison, and reacting to the outside world, life feels heavy. But when you begin to realize that your thoughts are something you can train, you slowly regain a very fundamental kind of control. The truth is, the modern world is filled with noise. The moment you pick up your phone, you're pulled into the rhythm of other people's lives, into their expectations, the news, and even emotions that don't belong to you. What exhausts so many people isn't their circumstances. It's the habit of constantly reacting to everything around them without a moment of pause to simply observe themselves. The Stoic mindset doesn't ask you to change the world. It starts with something much smaller, and yet much harder, learning to step away from that stream of reaction. You still go to work. You still face pressure. You still deal with things that don't go your way. But the way you perceive them begins to change. It's not about avoiding them, but about understanding what is within your control and what is not. There's a noticeable shift when you apply this to your morning. Instead of starting the day with rush or stress, you create a small space, maybe just a few minutes, to observe the state of your own mind. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to notice. And that simple act of noticing is what keeps you from being swept away from the very start of the day. What's interesting is, when you do this long enough, you start to see small but clear changes. Situations that used to make you lose control now feel more manageable. Not because they've disappeared, but because you no longer react to them unconsciously. So, this isn't about teaching you how to become a perfect version of yourself overnight. It's much more realistic. It's for those who have ever felt overwhelmed by life, who have had days that started with a heavy feeling for no clear reason, and who are looking for a different approach, a calmer, clearer one. If that sounds like you, then keep listening, not because this is a quick fix, but because what you're about to discover might help you rebuild the way you start each day. And sometimes, just by changing the beginning, the rest of the day slowly changes with it. It's interesting how many people think that finding a purpose in life has to be something grand or distant. But really, it starts with very ordinary questions. In very small moments, like when you're sitting alone in the evening, asking yourself, how did I live today? The concept of ikigai is often described as the intersection of four things: what you care about, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what can create economic value. It might sound theoretical, but in real life, it's much more personal. It's not about immediately finding some grand mission, but about recognizing the things that feel meaningful when you do them, even the small things you repeat every day. Try to imagine a different kind of morning, not the kind where you feel dragged out of bed, but one where you feel a reason to begin. It doesn't have to be excitement, just enough clarity so that the day no longer feels like a burden. The difference is knowing what you're moving toward, even if the path is still taking shape. Marcus Aurelius didn't see life as a series of trials to be endured, but as a process where each person is playing their part. This offers a very practical perspective. You don't have to become someone else, you just need to do your part well, with focus and integrity. And when you place that next to ikigai, things become clearer. Purpose isn't just about chasing what you like. It's about finding a balance between your skills, your values, and your contribution. But the problem is, most people don't stop long enough to ask themselves these questions. They get swept up in the pace of life, in their jobs, in outside expectations, until there's no space left to look inward. and then they feel lost. Not because they don't have goals, but because they've never really faced themselves to find them. This process doesn't have a quick answer. It might take you days, weeks, or even years to truly understand yourself. But it's the constant questioning, adjusting, and experimenting that creates change. When you start connecting your daily actions to a deeper meaning, even simple things like going to work, studying, or caring for your family begin to feel more significant. You become more present in your relationships, you think more clearly, and that feeling of emptiness starts to fade. Another important thing many people overlook is how your state in the evening directly affects your state the next morning. If you end your day feeling tired, disorganized, or caught up in things that don't matter, it's very hard to start the next day with clarity. On the other hand, if you take a little time to organize your thoughts and identify a few priorities for tomorrow, you're creating a better starting point for yourself. Stoic philosophy emphasizes that our actions shouldn't be random reactions, but conscious choices. And that doesn't start in the morning. It starts with how you end your day. When you understand this, you realize a good morning isn't a matter of luck. It's the result of preparation. So, instead of trying to find the perfect answer to life's purpose right away, perhaps it's more practical to start with small things: a question before you sleep, a clear intention when you wake. And if you repeat that long enough, you'll slowly see your path become clearer, not by force, but by recognition. Some evenings pass by so quickly, you barely notice. One more episode, a few more minutes scrolling on your phone, and then a little more, until you look at the clock and realize it's far too late. The feeling then is usually, it's fine, I can still wake up tomorrow. But the next morning, when your body feels heavy and your mind is foggy, you realize the price of those small choices from the night before. The key isn't what you watch or do in the evening, but the state you leave yourself in before you go to sleep. Your brain isn't an on-off switch. It needs time to cool down, to process the day, and to prepare for the next. If you keep feeding it stimulus right up until you sleep, you're asking it to rest while it's still running at full speed. A more realistic approach isn't to force yourself into a rigid routine, but to design your evening as a support system for tomorrow. It doesn't have to be complicated, just one small, conscious change. For example, instead of holding your phone until the moment you turn off the light, you create a short buffer of time away from the screen, not to discipline yourself, but to send a clear signal to your body that the day is closing. Another habit that seems simple but has a clear impact: write down 3 things you truly need to do the next day. Not a long list, not a perfect plan, just 3 specific points, so you don't wake up feeling adrift. When you've already set a direction, the morning becomes far less chaotic. The Stoic mindset focuses on distinguishing between what is in your control and what is not. You can't control everything that will happen tomorrow, but you can absolutely control how you enter that day. And that begins the night before, not the morning of. A small detail that's often overlooked is your breath. When you take a few minutes to breathe in slowly and exhale even slower, your body begins to shift into a state of rest. Your heart rate slows, tension eases, and you stop carrying the full weight of the day into your sleep. It's not complicated, but done consistently, it makes a real difference in the quality of your rest. In today's always connected world, creating that space for separation isn't easy. But that's exactly why it's so valuable. When you don't start your morning with notifications, news, or requests from others, you reserve a piece of autonomy for yourself. The first few minutes of the day are no longer about reacting, but about observing and directing. And when that is repeated long enough, you will realize something very clearly. A good day doesn't start in the morning. It starts with how you ended the night before. There's a familiar moment that many of us overlook. The moment you wake up, your hand almost automatically reaches for your phone. No thought required, no decision made. And in just a few seconds, your mind is no longer your own. Marcus Aurelius didn't live in an age of notifications or social media, but he understood something that remains just as true today. Your attention is not infinite, and how you use it will define your entire experience of life. The thing is, we often think we're starting our day, but what we're actually doing is reacting to someone else's text messages, emails, news headlines. They all rush in before you've had a chance to decide how you want your day to feel. And from that point on, you're being pulled along instead of intentionally stepping forward. The Stoic mindset doesn't ask you to stay away from technology. It just poses a simpler but much harder question. Are you choosing how your day begins, or are you letting it be decided by things outside of you? Try to imagine a different kind of morning. You wake up, but there's no rush, no immediate stream of notifications breaking through. Just a brief moment, a space where you can simply be with yourself. Maybe it's a few pages from a book, a few thoughts written down, or just sitting quietly with a cup of coffee, looking out the window. It might sound small, but moments like these create a huge difference. Because when you aren't immediately distracted, you're building a kind of mental reserve, a reserve of focus, clarity, and calm. And those things don't just disappear, they stay with you through every small decision you make during the day. Many people try to improve their mornings by adding more habits, more tasks, more discipline. But in reality, the change doesn't come from adding things, it comes from taking them away, removing what isn't necessary, the stimuli that don't serve you, the things that cause you to start your day already feeling pulled in different directions. And this is where the Stoic mindset becomes very practical. You don't control everything that will happen today, but you have complete control over how you begin it. When you protect your agency in those first few minutes, you change the entire trajectory of your day without much effort at all. You might not feel the difference immediately, but if you keep this up long enough, you'll realize something very clearly. Life doesn't just change because circumstances get better. It changes because you learned how to keep your focus where it truly belongs. You can't control how full your inbox will be tomorrow morning, but you can absolutely decide when and in what state of mind you will open it. This difference sounds small, but it's the line between a day that sweeps you away and a day lived with intention. Think back to your usual mornings. You've just opened your eyes, and seconds later, you're already in someone else's stream. Emails, messages, notifications. Before you've even chosen what you want to do, you've already started reacting. And from that moment on, the rest of the day just follows that momentum. The Stoic mindset offers another choice, not to fight against the world, but to delay your reaction to it. When you keep those first few minutes for yourself, you're creating a buffer, a space where you can shape your day before it shapes you. Marcus Aurelius, along with Seneca and Epictetus, didn't just talk about enduring hardship. They emphasized something much more practical, that intentional actions, repeated daily, gradually build the person you become. And the morning is where that begins most clearly. One of the simplest but most powerful foundations is consistency. Waking up at the same time every day might sound small, but it's like laying the first brick for the entire structure that follows. When you don't start the day in a rush, you maintain a sense of stability, something so many people are missing. The hard part, however, isn't understanding this, it's maintaining it. In the first few days, the desire to stay in bed will feel very real. Your body seeks comfort, and your mind will offer every reason to delay just a little bit longer. This isn't a sign that you lack discipline, it's a natural reaction. The difference lies in how you face that moment. Instead of relying on willpower alone, you return to your original reason. What are you building for yourself? Not a perfect morning, but a more stable, clearer version of yourself, one who is less easily swept away. When you look beyond the immediate feeling of comfort, you start to see the long-term value of these small changes. Waking up early isn't just about changing the time, it's about changing how you enter the day. From there, the way you think, the way you react, and the way you make decisions also begin to change. Consistency, therefore, isn't about forcing yourself to repeat an action. It's about creating a stable rhythm for your life. And that rhythm doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be clear enough that you no longer start every day in a state of ambiguity. If you want to turn this into a real habit, start the night before. You don't need a complicated plan. Just identify one specific reason to wake up tomorrow, one thing you want to accomplish, one direction you want to move in. When you go to sleep with that clarity, the next morning is no longer a battle. It's a natural continuation. There's one thing so many people overlook when they talk about morning discipline, and that's the reason why. Not a generic reason, but one that's real enough to make you willing to leave your bed when it's at its warmest. Before you go to sleep, you don't need a complex plan. Just ask yourself one very specific question. Why is waking up at that time important to times me asterisk? Maybe it's to have a few quiet minutes you can't get during the day. Maybe it's to read a few pages of a book you keep putting off. Or maybe it's simpler to just start the day without rushing. When the reason is clear enough, the action feels less heavy. Then, support yourself with your environment. This isn't about force, it's about creating the right conditions. Go to bed a little earlier so your body isn't sleep-deprived. Let natural light into your room in the morning. Small things like this don't create immediate change, but they reduce the friction, making it easier to stay on track. But there will be days when you fail. The alarm goes off, and you turn it off. Not because you're lazy, but because your body is seeking familiar comfort. This is the part many people get wrong. They think failing here is a lack of willpower. In reality, it's just a very normal human response. Marcus Aurelius used to remind himself to be patient with himself, not to be lenient, but to avoid sabotaging his own growth with excessive self-criticism. When you start a new habit, the hard part isn't getting it right the first time. It's continuing after the times you get it wrong. You can picture that moment. You lie in bed for a few more minutes, then realize you've messed up. And in that moment, you have two choices. One is to blame yourself, think you're not disciplined enough, and gradually give up. The other is to pause, acknowledge what just happened, and see it as part of the process. The Stoic mindset doesn't deny discipline, but it pairs discipline with self-awareness. You recognize your weakness, learn from it, and then you continue. You don't prolong the frustration. You don't turn one small mistake into a reason to abandon the entire journey. The truth is, the first few weeks will always be hard. The feeling of wanting to stay in comfort is very real. But if you can hold on to just one thing coming back the next day without carrying the weight of self-blame, you've already gone much further than someone who tries to be perfect from the start. So, what's important isn't how many perfect mornings you have. It's whether you keep coming back after the ones that aren't. And it is that act of returning, repeated long enough, that truly shapes the person you become. There's a very real moment that few people talk about. You wake up later than planned, you look at the clock, and a voice in your head immediately says, "I've failed again." But just stop for a second. Take a deep breath, not to ignore the problem, but to stop a small deviation from becoming a reason to abandon the entire process. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself not to be overly self-critical whenever he made a mistake, not because he was being soft, but because he understood something very practical. If you turn on yourself after every stumble, you will never go the distance. Patience with yourself doesn't make you weak. It allows you to continue. This is especially true when you're building a new habit. In the early days, your body will resist. It wants to stay in familiar comfort, and there will be times you don't follow the plan. This isn't the problem. The problem is how you react afterward. You can choose to blame yourself and slowly lose motivation. Or you can look at what happened, understand it, and see tomorrow as another chance. That second choice is what creates real change. The Stoic mindset isn't just about discipline, It's also about understanding yourself deeply enough to work times with times yourself, instead of against yourself. You adjust little by little. You don't use force, but you also don't give up. It's a difficult balance, but a sustainable one. And during that process, small actions start to gain more meaning. For example, putting your alarm clock on the other side of the room. It seems so simple, but it creates a decisive moment. When you have to get out of bed to turn it off, you've already crossed the line between wanting and doing. Or making your bed every morning. No one asks you to do it, no one is checking. But that's precisely why it becomes a conscious choice. A way of telling yourself, I care about how I live, even in the smallest details. Actions like these don't change your life overnight. But when they are repeated long enough, they begin to shape how you see yourself. You're no longer the person trying to change. You become the person who actually lives by their choices. So this journey isn't just about waking up early or building habits. It's the process of learning how to face yourself with resolve, but also with understanding. And it's that combination that creates a foundation strong enough for you to go far. There's a very practical way of looking at self-change that many people overlook. You don't change through big decisions alone, but through very small choices, repeated every single day. Every time you choose to get out of bed on time, every time you tidy your space, or simply choose not to get swept away by distractions first thing in the morning, you are quietly casting a vote for the person you want to become, not with your words, but with your actions. Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics didn't talk much about controlling the world. They focused on something much closer. What's within your grasp right at this moment? Because the reality is, most of the major events in life are not up to you, but how you start your day, how you maintain order in your own space, and how you respond to the little things that is entirely within your control. This is why small actions have so much value, not because they are big in themselves, but because they are always possible. Anyone can do them. And it's the repetition of these possible actions that builds the foundation for bigger changes. When you maintain these small disciplines, you're training a much more important skill, the ability to keep a promise to yourself. And this skill doesn't just stay in the morning. It carries over into how you work, how you handle pressure, and how you stand firm when things don't go your way. The Stoic spirit, then, isn't about forcing yourself to do more, but about clarifying what truly matters and holding on to it. When you focus on what you can control, you're less distracted by what's beyond your reach. And that creates a very different state of being calmer, more stable. What's interesting is, when you look back, it's those seemingly small moments like the decision to get up when the alarm rings, or taking a few minutes to organize your space, that are the points where your character is most clearly formed. No one is watching, no one is judging, but you know what you chose. And if you want to go further, don't do this alone. When you share your goals with someone you trust, the journey changes. Not because you depend on them, but because you have an anchor to remind you to get back on course when you drift. That person can be simple, a friend, a colleague, but they act as a mirror, reflecting your own commitment. When you start to slip, they remind you why you started. When you move forward, they are there to acknowledge those small steps with you. And importantly, this relationship isn't one-sided. You also become their support. Two people moving forward together, adjusting together, learning how to persevere together. This connection is what makes the journey of self-development feel less like a burden and more real and sustainable. In the end, it all comes back to a very simple point. You don't need to control your entire life to change it. You just need to control how you begin today and repeat that long enough. There's a very common misunderstanding when it comes to discipline and self-development, that it has to be a lonely journey. You try on your own, you overcome on your own, you change on your own. But if you look closer, you'll see we aren't built to walk alone for too long. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus didn't just talk about inner strength. They also emphasized the relationships between people. not for dependency, but for mutual growth. Because when you know you're not the only one struggling, a part of the pressure naturally lifts. Think about the days you wanted to give up, the days you woke up later than you planned, or lost motivation for no clear reason. If you're all alone, it's incredibly easy to let yourself slide. But if there's one person who knows what you're trying to do, everything changes. They don't need to push you, just their presence is sometimes enough to bring you back. A true partner on this path isn't someone who controls you. They are someone who helps you see what you can't see yourself. It might be a habit you think is fine but is actually slowing you down. It could be a way of thinking that you don't even realize is limiting you. More importantly, it's a space where you can be honest. You don't have to pretend to be strong all the time. You can admit you're having a hard time, that you've lost your way, without fear of being judged. And it's that honesty that creates lasting change. Of course, to have a relationship like this, you also need to choose carefully. Not everyone is the right fit. The person doesn't need to be perfect, but they need to share one thing with you. They are also serious about improving themselves. And more importantly, you have to trust them enough to share the parts of you that are still a work in progress. Once you have that person, be clear with each other. What are you working towards? Where do you need support? It doesn't have to be complicated. Just regular conversations where you can both reflect, adjust, and continue. Sometimes, just a gentle reminder at the right moment can change the direction of an entire day. But what makes this relationship so special isn't just about staying disciplined, it's about the connection. When two people are trying together, stumbling together, and getting back up together, the journey is no longer a heavy burden. It becomes a meaningful process where you both grow. And from a Stoic perspective, this goes a bit deeper. When you are aware that your time is finite, you value the relationships that help you live better. Not the superficial connections, but the people who truly help you become clearer, stronger, and more focused. In the end, discipline isn't just something you do alone in silence. It's also about who you choose to walk with. And sometimes, with the right person by your side, you will go much further than you ever could alone. There's a very simple question, but if you pause long enough to think about it, it can change how you see your entire day. If today could not be repeated, would you live it differently? Marcus Aurelius didn't see remembering the finite nature of life as something dark. On the contrary, he saw it as a way to clarify what truly matters. When you realize that time is not infinite, the small things start to lose their weight. The things that used to annoy you suddenly don't seem worth the energy anymore. This isn't meant to create pressure, but to free you from what is unnecessary. You start to choose more carefully who you spend your time with, what work you do, and what you care about. Not because you have to, but because you understand the value of each day more clearly. The morning, seen this way, is no longer just a series of repeated habits. It's like a new starting point, a blank space that you can shape yourself. You don't need to do anything massive. Just pause for a few seconds and ask yourself, if today really mattered, how would I choose to begin it? That question alone changes how you act. You procrastinate less on the things that have meaning. You pay more attention to the people around you. And you become more forgiving of imperfections because you no longer want to waste energy on things that don't bring long-term value. An interesting point in Stoic thought is that they don't just encourage positive thinking, they also practice something that seems counterintuitive, preparing for unfavorable possibilities. Not to be pessimistic, but to be more resilient. You can visualize simple scenarios, a plan not going as expected, a workday being harder than you thought, or a conversation not going smoothly. Once you've walked through those possibilities in your mind, you're no longer caught by surprise when they happen. This preparation doesn't make you more anxious. On the contrary, it creates a sense of agency. You know that whatever happens, you can respond with more calm, more clarity. And that very fact reduces the weight of difficulties when they actually appear. When you combine these two things, the awareness of your limited time and the practice of preparing for setbacks, you start to live in a very different way, not with more stress, but with more intention, not by trying to control everything, but by choosing how you respond to it. So, the morning isn't just when you wake up, it's when you remind yourself that this day has value, not because it will be perfect, but because you have the chance to live it a little more meaningfully than you did yesterday. There's a habit that might sound strange at first, but if you understand it correctly, it can make you much calmer, preparing in advance for things to go wrong. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus didn't teach people to avoid hardship. They taught a more realistic approach. Accept that things beyond your control will always exist, and instead of being surprised by them, prepare for how you will face them. Imagine a very familiar morning. You leave the house in a normal mood, and then one small thing goes wrong. Maybe a plan gets changed, a conversation doesn't go well, or things just aren't flowing at the pace you want. And immediately, your emotions get hijacked. But if, beforehand, you had spent a few minutes thinking about such possibilities, things would be different. Not because the problem disappears, but because you've already met it once in your mind. When it happens for real, you no longer react in a rush. This is how Stoicism approaches what many call negative visualization. It's not meant to make you anxious, but to prevent you from being shocked. It's like a light workout for the mind where you practice navigating difficult situations, but from a place of safety. What's interesting is, when you do this regularly, you start to notice a very different effect. When you imagine losing something familiar, an opportunity, a relationship, or even just a normal day, you return to the present with a much clearer sense of gratitude. You no longer take what you have for granted. And that small shift in perspective makes life feel lighter and deeper. The key is how you practice this. You don't need to think of anything too extreme or heavy. Just a few minutes in the morning before you start your day. You can ask yourself, if today doesn't go as I hope, how will I respond? What do I want to hold on to? My calm, my clarity, or my patience? You don't need a perfect answer. You just need to visualize it. When you've rehearsed it beforehand, you carry a kind of quiet preparation with you, one that's just enough to keep you from being swept away. And in the end, this doesn't make you pessimistic. On the contrary, it helps you live more realistically, more grounded, and with more gratitude. Not because life gets easier, but because you become more prepared to walk through it. After you've spent a few minutes mentally preparing for what might happen, do something just as important. Let it go. Don't carry it with you all day. Don't hold it in your mind as a worry. Simply know that you are ready and return to the present moment. And then, as the day passes and evening arrives, there's a small habit that makes a huge difference. One that many people overlook, pausing for a moment to reflect. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just a few minutes before you sleep, you can ask yourself, what happened today, no matter how small, that brought a little bit of peace? Maybe it was a pleasant conversation, a task you completed, or simply the feeling of lying down to rest after a long day. Writing those things down, even just a line or two, isn't about forcing positivity. It helps you shift your attention from what's missing to what you have, from what you haven't achieved, to what has already happened. Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics always emphasized a very practical truth. You don't control everything, but you can choose where to place your focus, and that choice will determine how you experience your life. When you end your day with this perspective, your sleep changes too. Your mind is no longer pulled into unfinished business or repeating thoughts. Instead, it begins to settle, not because everything was perfect, but because you chose to close the day with more clarity. And what's interesting is, this habit doesn't just stay in the evening, it carries over into the next morning. When you wake up, your first state of mind is no longer annoyance or rush, but a lighter feeling, as if you're not starting from zero, but continuing a rhythm you've already set. And over time, this change isn't just internal. You start to notice the people around you more. Things you used to overlook, a kind word, a small gesture, now carry more meaning. You react more slowly, you observe more deeply, and you connect on a different level. Ultimately, it all comes back to something very simple. A good day doesn't have to be a perfect day. But if you know how to end it with clarity and appreciation, you've built the foundation for a slightly better tomorrow. And if you repeat that long enough, you'll realize life doesn't change because of giant leaps. It changes by how you mindfully close each day, one by one. If you look back at the entire journey you've just been on, you'll notice something quite clear. What you've learned aren't tricks for a better life. They are a different way of seeing your own life. The principles you've just discovered don't ask you to be perfect. They just help you become a little clearer each day, a little more grounded, knowing what you're doing, instead of being swept away by everything around you. Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics never promised that life would be easy, but they pointed to a more practical truth. When you change how you think and react, your experience of life changes with it. You don't have to do everything at once. You don't need to apply every principle perfectly. Just start with one small thing. A more mindful morning, a slower reaction, a moment of pausing to observe yourself, and repeat it. Because in the end, what creates change isn't one big decision, but the small actions that are sustained long enough. If you find these ideas meaningful, keep going deeper, not by searching for more and more information, but by applying them and observing. What truly works for you? What needs to be adjusted? That is the process that turns philosophy into real experience. And if you want to go even further, share your journey. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to be better than anyone. Just be real. When you talk about what you're going through, both the wins and the struggles, you not only gain more clarity for yourself, you help others realize they aren't the only ones trying. In the end, the most important thing isn't how much you've learned, but what you will carry with you from this moment. A different way to start your day, a different way to look at hardship, and perhaps a slightly more intentional way to live. This journey doesn't end here. It's only just beginning. If you've made it this far, you didn't just watch a video. You just spent time reflecting on your own life. What you've gained isn't some temporary motivation, but a different perspective, calmer, clearer, and more intentional. And in return, the only thing I hope you take with you is one simple idea. Tomorrow, start just a little differently. It doesn't have to be perfect, just intentional. Marcus Aurelius once reminded us that how you live each day is how you build your entire life. If this video made you pause and think, leave a comment. I choose discipline, or share one thing you're trying to change. And if you want to continue this journey, subscribe to the channel, because this isn't a place to escape from life. It's a place to learn how to face it with more strength. I'll see you in the next video.